Hello, I'm Rich, and this is our third lesson out of 5. And today's lesson is going to be accesses and how to create reports and graphs inside of STK. In this particular lesson, we're just going to look at the access tool. Accesses are just can I see you or can't I see you? And then we'll look at the report and graph manager and learn how to create custom reports and custom graphs. So this is our third lesson, access reports and graphs. Like the other two, this is just a quick overview. If you want to see the detailed version of this tutorial, you need to go into our tutorial section and bring up the third lesson in our fundamentals training. So this is access reports and graphs. Engineers and operators often need to determine the times one object can access or see another object. In addition, they need to impose constraints on accesses between objects to define what constitutes a valid access. These constraints are numerous, such as elevation angle, sunlight or umbra restrictions, gimbal speed, range, etc. They also require the ability to create reports and graphs that summarize static data or show dynamic data during animation. Building on your fundamental understanding of STK, you will learn two important tools to solve this problem: the access tool and the report and graph manager. So we're going to look at the access tool, how it functions. We're going to look at data providers and how data providers are grouped together with groups, data providers, and elements. And we'll look at this in the report and graph manager. I'll show you how to generate pre-built reports with quick reports and how to save data externally by exporting reports. We'll also look how to create custom reports, choosing the elements that you need out of your data providers. And finally, we'll throw a 3D dynamic display in your 3D graphics window. And it's really good for a report or a briefing. So we're going to go ahead and start by creating a new scenario. So I'll come into STK here and click Create a Scenario. And I'm going to call my scenario Accesses, Reports, Graphs. So accesses, reports, graphs. Normally I'd want to go ahead and bring in a certain day and time, but we'll just go ahead and use defaults for this video. So just go ahead and click OK and start up our scenario. Now this lesson will build on things that we've learned so far in lesson 1, creating a scenario, and lesson 2, objects and properties. We'll get into some things that we didn't cover in the objects and properties. So just like we always do when the scenario first opens, I'm going to go up to the toolbar, click Save, and when the Save As window opens, click Save, and now my scenario is in a unique folder. We're going to go ahead and bring in a facility object, and we're going to use a facility called Castle Rock, and it's in Colorado. So I'm going to go into the Insert STK Objects tool, select Facility as my object, from Standard Object Database as my method, and click Insert. When the Search Standard Object Data window opens, I'm going to go to the name field and we'll simply type in Castle Rock. Castle space Rock. Let's go ahead and click Search. And you're going to get 3 choices, and really any of them will work. But I'm going to go ahead and use the AGI Object Data Service, the first one. This will download it from the AGI server and put it into my scenario. So I'm going to click Insert. And once Castle Rock's in here, you can go ahead and close your Search Standard Object Data window. And we have our ground site. Now if you bring your 3D graphic window to the front, I'm going to go over to the object browser, right click on Castle Rock, teleport, and select Zoom 2. Now we have our streaming terrain coming in from Terrain Server, but you know now in the fundamentals when you're using the free version of STK, this is just visual terrain. There's no analysis being done to it. So with line of sight turned on from this facility object or any other objects that we bring in STK, it sees right through the terrain. There's a lot of our scenarios where we simply drop the terrain server and take it out of the picture. So that's what we're going to do here. Let's go over to the object browser. Let's open up the properties for Access Reports Graphs, your scenario object. And I'm going to drop down to the basic terrain page, basic terrain. And you can see right here where it says terrain server, use terrain server for analysis. Just uncheck that box. Click OK and come back out to your 3D graphic window, and it's going to look a little funny. Castle Rock is now up in space. But what happened here is when you turn off Terrain Server, you have the WGS84 underneath this, but the facility object is using a terrain file that was built when the facility object was built. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell it to sit on top of the WGS84. Let's open up the properties for Castle Rock Teleport. So come back over to the object browser, right click on Castle Rock and select Properties. You can see the altitude is at 2.071 kilometers, but over on the right where it says terrain data, check this box. That's going to change it to 0 kilometers because it's reading the current terrain in your scenario, which happens to be the WGS84. Go ahead and click OK and close your properties, and what you'll see now is Castle Rock's facility object will now be on the surface of the terrain, or the WGS84. Now we could restrict Castle Rock's field of view and do all of our analysis from here, but what we will do is, in order to visualize what we want to see, is we'll go ahead and bring a sensor object in instead. Let's go ahead and go into the Insert STK Objects tool. Select Sensor as your object. Insert Default as your method. And click Insert. When the Select Object window appears, you're going to select Castle Rock Teleport. This is the object we're attaching the sensor to, and click OK. And you can see that sensor is now attached to Castle Rock. It's a simple conic sensor with a 45-degree half angle. Let's rename that sensor. So I'm going to go over to the object browser, right click on the sensor and select Rename. And I'm going to call my sensor CR_FOV, and that simply stands for Castle Rock Field of View. Let's open Castle Rock Field of View's properties. So I'm going to right click on Castle Rock FOV, CR_FOV, and select Properties. We're going to open up our field of view to 180 degrees, which means I have to set my cone half angle to 90 degrees. So I'm going to highlight everything in that field for the cone half angle, type in 90, hit Tab, and STK will put the degrees in there for me. Go ahead and apply that. And we're also going to restrict the range on our sensors. So I'm going to go down to the Constraints basic page. And I'm going to go up to the range frame, turn on max. And we'll change our range to 1,000 kilometers, 1,000. This is the only change I'm going to make. Click OK. And when you come back to Castle Rock, zoom out into space. So I'm just going to hold down my right mouse button, push the facility away from me, and eventually I'll see the field of view for the Castle Rock sensor. Now we're going to insert some satellites. Now I want to point out again that we're doing this using all the default times. So if you're doing this scenario at a later date, which you're going to be doing, because I'm doing this on a specific day, your day is going to be different. You're going to get different data to me, but that doesn't matter. If you use the tutorial as written, then everybody will get the same data. But for now, I'm just trying to show you the concepts and how this works. Let's go back into the Insert STK Objects tool. I'm going to select Satellite as my object, from Standard Object Database as my method, and click Insert. When the Search Standard Object Data window opens, let's go down to the name or ID field, and I'm going to type inside here CubeSat, one long word, CubeSat. So CubeSat. Go ahead and click Search. I only want to bring in the operational CubeSats for my scenario today. It's possible there'll be more when you do your scenario if you use default times, because they're going to launch more. But for today, I'm going to use the operational CubeSats that I have today. To get that, I'm going to come up here to the results, and I'm going to come over to the column called Operational Status. Click that tab. And what will happen is you'll get a little arrow to the right of that. Right now my arrow is pointing up, so if I click it again, my arrow is pointing down. What I want to do is I want to pick all the operational satellites, and you can see them in here. Operational, there's 4 of them in my scenario. And I also want to bring them in from the AGI Standard Object Data Service. So I'm going to click in here and select all 4 of these using my Shift key. If you have 5, if you have 3, it doesn't matter. Just pick the operational satellites. Once you select your satellites, click Insert and wait for your satellites to download and propagate using the TLEs for those satellites and the SGP4 propagator. You'll know it's finished when you can see all your satellites over here in the object browser. Once that happens, come back into the Search Standard Object Data window and go down and click Close. Now we're going to look at the Access tool. The Access tool allows you to create an access between one object and one object, or one object and many objects. Think of the Access tool as can I see you or can't I see you? This is one of the basic functions in STK. I'm going to go up to the toolbar in STK and I'm going to click the Access tool. It's this guy right here. Go ahead and click that. When the Access tool opens, the access for that you see at the top here is the object you're doing your access from. And then in the associated objects list, the objects you select down here are the accesses you're doing to. So you're going from here to here. If the field of view from Castle Rock, the sensor, is not showing in the access for, all you have to do is click the button called Select Object and select that sensor in the Select Object window. I'll click OK, and now my sensor is selected as my access for. And now I'll go down to the associated objects list, and I'm going to select my 4 CubeSat satellites. And I'll just use either my Control key or my Shift key and select all 4. Then I'm going to click Compute, and you're going to see some changes in your view. And what you're seeing here is the little key with the check mark above it in front of it means that there's an access. And all of your labels have become bold and there's an asterisk placed in front of it. So there's a lot of visuals in this one. So I've computed accesses. Also, if I look down here in my timeline view, you can see the accesses down here in the timeline view. And you can see access lines when they occur. Another visual. If you bring the 2D graphic window to the front, so I'll click on the 2D graphic tab, and if I zoom into the vicinity of Castle Rock, I can see these lines on my 2D graphic window. These are access lines. This is telling me that a satellite has flown through my field of view and I've accessed it. It doesn't tell me which satellite it is, but I can see I have accesses. Let's go back to the access tool, and I'm going to go over here to the reports frame. And I'm going to click access. And this will create an access report. There's a lot of information in the access report that tells me what satellite I can see, how many times I can see it, when I can see it, and for how long. And then we get minimum duration, maximum duration, mean duration, and then total duration. If for some reason there wasn't an access to one of my satellites, it would actually tell me no access found. As I scroll down, it seems that all 4 satellites were seen by my ground site at least once. Then when I get down to the bottom of the report, I have global statistics. The minimum duration is telling me the shortest duration on one of my satellites. Max duration obviously is one of my satellites who I saw the longest period of time. And then again, mean duration for all of them, and then the total duration, and this is just a combination duration for all my satellites that I see for the 24-hour period. Let's close the access report. So I'm going to go down here to this tab that says report. Right click on that tab and select close. Next we'll run an access graph. So I'm going to come over here to the right again, and I'm going to go to the graph frame, and I'm going to click access. So I can see the accesses in this graph. I can save these externally. I can also go to one of these accesses and zoom into it. There's no trick to it. I just need to go to this. I'll go to this access right here. You can pick one on your screen. If you hold down your left mouse button and draw a box around that access, it'll zoom into that access. And you can zoom in as many times as you want. If you put your cursor at the beginning of that access, it's going to tell you when that takes place. And if you put your cursor at the end of that access, it'll tell you when it ends. You can go up to the toolbar at the top of the access graph, and you can click the zoom out icon, and it'll bring you out to the access graph again. So I'm going to go ahead and go down to the graph tab, right click and select close. Next I'm going to do what's called an azimuth elevation range report. So I'm going to come back to the report frame, but this time I'll click AER. Now the access report tells me when I can see the satellite, but the azimuth elevation range report tells me where to look. So you can see the first one here. It tells me what the azimuth is based on my X body. So if I were to turn the body axes on for Castle Rock, the X body is going to point to true north. So this is based on true north. The elevation's off the surface of the WGS-84, and the reason it's so high is because we're using the sensor object, and it's telling me the range. And since I have a range of 1,000 kilometers, obviously this satellite is just entering the field of view for my sensor. Let's go ahead and close this report and go back to the access tool. There's times when you want to save the original data in a report or a graph because you're going to make some changes to properties. And we're going to do that. We're going to expand our sensor. But I want to not lose my original numbers on my original report. If that's the case, what you need to do is to save a report or a graphic externally. To do this, I'm going to go ahead and just select my first satellite here. In my case, it's Compass 2. I'm going to redo an access report. So I'm going to select this, go down to the reports frame and click access. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to save it as an external text file. To do that, I'm going to come up to the toolbar in the report itself, and I'm going to click the save icon. And if you put your cursor on this, it's going to tell you that it's saved as text. So these are my original numbers. I want to compare these numbers with the report that I run after I expand the field of view for my sensor. So I'm going to click that. It's going to ask me where I want to save it. I'm going to save it in my folder, which it automatically jumps to, but you could save it anywhere you want. I'm just going to use the Access Reports and Graphs folder. It's going to give it a name down here. You can call it anything you want. And then click Save. I can view this now using Windows File Explorer. So I'll just come down here to my taskbar and select my Windows File Explorer. And then I'm going to go to my scenario folder, and to find that I can just go to Documents, STK 12. There's my folder, Access Reports and Graphs. I'll open that. And I'm just looking for my text file over here. And there it is, text document. I can double click on that and it'll open up, and it looks just like it did inside of STK, but it's external. So now if I make any changes, these numbers will always be the same because it's an external file. And you can do the same thing with a graph. I'm going to close this. I'm going to close my Windows File Explorer and get back into STK. You can also save this report as a CSV file for Excel, and you would just simply go up and you would click this icon right here. And one of the benefits of doing that is that you can format the columns if you're looking for large numbers or small numbers, so on and so forth. You have other choices too. You can right click on the report and go down to export, and it gives you some other choices. Complete would be exports data Excel as a CSV file, includes summary information, and then sets the export options for your report. Let's leave the report open, and we're going to extend the sensor's range. So I'm going to go into the properties of the sensor. So I'm going to go over here to CRFOV. I'm going to right click and select properties. Drop down to the constraints basic page, and we're going to increase the range to 1,500 kilometers. 1,500. Click OK. When you come back to your report, come up here to the toolbar and click the refresh button, and it will apply your change. And I went from 362 seconds to 709 seconds. Again, yours might be different. I can change this into minutes if I'd like. I can go up here to the toolbar. I can open up this icon right here, report units. And right now my time is based on seconds. I can come over here to the new unit value and select minutes and click OK. And now my report will be in minutes. I can save this report internally if I'd like by using what's called quick reports. I can go up here to the quick report button right here, Save as quick report, click that button. And then I can view this and rename it if I'd like using the quick report manager. So I'll go up here to the top of STK into the toolbar area, and I'm going to click this icon right here, and this will open up the quick report manager. If you have multiple quick reports, this is an easy way to rename them. I'll open this up a little bit, and I can just call this what it is: sensor to CubeSat, just to give it a name. And this will differentiate them if you have multiple reports. The show on load that you see to the right here, if you close your scenario and then reopen your scenario, it'll automatically bring up that report. If you don't want that to happen, turn it off. You can also give it a description of what the report's all about. Let's go ahead and click OK. Close the report quick report manager. Let's close the report, and let's close the access tool. So down the road, you want to go ahead and use this quick report. To do that, I'm simply going to go back up to the quick report manager, but this time I'm going to open up this little pull down menu. There's my sensor to CubeSat report. When I click on that, there's my report. It brings it right back up. Now keep in mind, if I had changed any more properties on either my satellite or my ground site, those numbers would change. That's why I got the other report out of STK for comparison. You can set a time from a report so you can jump to a important time in your scenario based on this report. I can go down here to the first access where it says start time, right click on this time, select start time when the first window pops up, and then when the second window pops up, select set animation time. And you can see that up here in the current scenario time field, this time matches my report time. We can go ahead and close this report, and we can create a stored view. What I'm going to do is bring my 3D graphic window to the front. I'm going to go over to the object browser, right click on the satellite that you did your report on. In my case, it was Compass 2, and select Zoom 2. You can set this up the way you want to see it. You can see my satellite is entering the field of view, and you can also see that there's an access line between the satellite and the ground site. I like this view, and I'm going to store it. I'm going to use this icon right here, Stored Views. Looks like an eyeball, an arrow, and a marshmallow. I have not eaten breakfast. Go ahead and click that icon. When the Stored View window pops up, we're going to create a new view by clicking New. And we're going to give it a name. Right now it says View 0. I'll just give it a name, and I'll say Sat to Ground, just to give it a name. It doesn't matter what you call it, but notice that it's going to put that time in here in the time field. Click OK. And when you come back out to your 3D graphic window, go up to the animation toolbar, click the reset button. And here's how you use that stored view. I can go back up here to the stored view icon and open up the little pull down menu. When I do that, I can see all my stored views that I named in here, and there's my sat to ground, and when I click that, it automatically jumps back to that view. So that's a great way to set up a view if you're going to create maybe a movie or something later on. Let's go ahead and jump to the Report and Graph Manager. So the Report and Graph Manager is going to give you a lot of information. I'm going to come up here to the toolbar in STK, and I'm going to click on this icon right here that looks like a cell phone sitting on top of a graph. That's the Quick Report Manager button. Go ahead and click on that button. You get a lot of information in here. What's important is if you can create a report on multiple objects. So right now my object type selected is satellite, and there's all my satellites. I would just have to select one satellite or all my satellites that I want to create a report against. I also have some time properties. Let's say you had like a 2-week scenario and you want to focus on a 24-hour period. You could come down here and you could specify time properties, tell it what time you want to create your report for, and you could also change the step size and how much you want to sample your object during that report period. Over on the right is styles. You can turn on and off graphs and reports depending on what you want to look at. If you look at the pre-built installed styles, they all have locks. Now this is a report, this is a graph, so you can see the difference between the two. The reason there's locks on there is that you can't change them. However, you can duplicate them and you can customize the duplication. Let's look at that. I'm going to select my satellite. It doesn't really matter which one I select. I'll select Compass 2, I can remember that. I'm going to come over here to the right to the installed styles and I'm going to select classical orbit elements. And then I'm going to click generate. So you can see this, I got my classical orbit elements and it's showing me in 60-second increments my classical orbit elements. I'm going to say for a custom report, I want to swap out these three, argument of perigee, true anomaly, mean anomaly, with J2000 Cartesian coordinates XYZ. So we're going to modify this report. I'm going to close the report. I'm going to come back into the styles list. I'm going to right click on the classical orbit elements and select properties. Over on the left are my data providers. They provide data. And over on the right are my report contents. I want to change the units for my semi-major axis. So I'm going to select my semi-major axis in the report contents. I'm going to come down to the button that says units and click units. You can see my current distance is in kilometers. I'm going to turn off use defaults and I'm going to change this to meters. There's no reason to do this, I'm just showing you how it works. I'm going to click OK, and now if I run the report, my semi-major axis is going to be in meters. I want to get rid of argument, perigee, true anomaly, and mean anomaly, so I'm going to come back into the contents, select those three, and I'm going to click remove. I'm going to come over here to the data providers, and the data provider I want to use is called Cartesian position, so I'm going to expand that. That's the group. I want to use the data provider called J2000, so I'm going to expand J2000. And I want to use the XYZ elements. So we got groups, data provider, elements. I'll select those three, XYZ. Click on the right arrow and move them over into my report contents. If I wasn't happy with their position, I could use the up and down arrows to move them around. And when I'm done, I'm going to click OK. You're going to get a warning. It's going to tell you the style's locked out. We saw the little locks, and it's putting this report in the My Styles list. I'm going to click OK. And when I come back into the styles field, you'll see now that I have a folder called My Styles. Go ahead and click the plus sign and expand that. And we're going to rename this Unlock Classical Orbit Elements, and there's a reason for that. So I'm going to go ahead and go into rename mode and throw the word My in front of classical. So My Classical Orbit Elements, I'll hit my enter key, and if you generate that, you'll see now that instead of argument, perigee, true anomaly, and mean anomaly, you now have J2000 XYZ coordinates. Also, if you recall, we changed the units for our semi-major axis from kilometers to meters, and you can see that here. Finally, we're going to go ahead and close this report, close the report in Graph Manager, and I'm going to create a 3D graphic window dynamic data display of that report. So to do that, I'm going to come back over to the object browser, right click on Compass 2 and open up its properties. We're talking 3D here. So I'm going to drop down to the 3D graphics data display page, 3D graphics data display. We need to add our custom report to this list, so I'm going to come up here and click add. And here's why I changed it, because we'd have two classical orbit elements in here. By renaming it my classical orbit elements, it makes it easier to find my custom report. I'm going to click OK. It's automatically going to put this report in the upper left-hand corner. You could have multiple reports if you wanted, just like PowerPoint presentations. If you put too much in there, it might be too hard to read. You could also title it. You could change the font size, and I'm going to go ahead and change the font size to medium. And then let's go ahead and click OK. And when we come back out to our 3D graphic window, I now have that data in here. And if I reset my scenario and then I go, okay, in my briefing, they want to see these values when the satellite is entering the field of view of my sensor, I can go up here to the stored views, open up the pull down menu, select sat to ground, and there's those numbers. I can go ahead and slow down my scenario, decrease my time step to maybe 1 second. And then when I start my scenario and animate it, I can see that dynamic display, and this makes a really cool movie. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and reset my scenario, and we'll jump to the summary of this scenario. In our third lesson, we went ahead and brought in a place object at Castle Rock. We attached the sensor to Castle Rock, and we created a field of view for an antenna system. It wasn't really an antenna, but it was just a field of view for that antenna. We brought in 3 CubeSat satellites. We created an axis and determined when those satellites flew through that field of view. Then what we did is I showed you how to create quick reports and how they work in STK. I also showed you how to take data out of STK and create outside reports such as text files and CSV files, i.e. Excel spreadsheets. Then we went into the Report and Graph Manager, and I discussed things like data providers, the reports that come with the Report and Graph Manager, and also how to go in and create your own custom reports and graphs using the data providers that you want to see on your own reports and graphs. And finally, we ended up taking some dynamic data from a report that we made, a custom report, and we placed it on the 3D graphic window. And what that'll do for you later down the road is if you're doing a briefing with STK, you can see that data on the window, or if you're creating a movie in STK, you can also see that data on the 3D graphic window. So have a great day, and I'll see you when I do lesson number 4.